By this point, everyone understands that the Strait of Hormuz is a significant source of bargaining leverage for Iran. But the true power of Hormuz is not just that Iran can use it to shut down the world's oil trade. It is how Iran can do it that is critical. And it speaks to a bargaining dynamic that we have not yet discussed in our 4+ years together. It is something that contributed to why the conflict in Iran started in the first place. And it represents a problem that we may soon encounter much further east, just in case we want to get dragged back into our broader world at war. So, to preview our journey for today, we will begin by examining something called proposal power, and how states arrive at a particular bargain given the variety of alternatives available. Then we will turn to why the balance of proposal power can dictate whether wars result from shifting military power. Finally, we will look at whether Taiwan can do something that Iran could not, that would have otherwise mitigated the issue. But let's start with a central bargaining problem. By now, you understand that the costs of war guarantee the existence of a range of mutually acceptable settlements, centered around the expected outcome of a fight, whether the setting is Ukraine or Iran. What we tend not to discuss is which of those deals is the one that the parties end up settling on. And that question is non-trivial. There are a ton of options, and there are significant distributional consequences for picking one versus the other. Indeed, someone asked about this exact problem during my recent call for topics for my new series over on Lines on Maps Extra. A good answer requires more than the 8 minutes that I limit myself to over there, and so here we are with no key details left untold. In short, if you can be the one to propose a particular division, then life is relatively great for you. After all, if Russia is left with a choice between this black line and war, the black line is better than the alternative, but it is much, much better than the alternative for Ukraine. The problem is that making a proposal in this context does not literally mean drawing a line on a map and then sending it over to your opponent. Rather, it is the ability to credibly threaten your opponent that if they do not take the offer that you have proposed, then the only alternative for them is to initiate a war. Here is a simple way to accomplish that goal. Imagine that the object at stake is the territory between your two capitals. Then you could have your troops retreat back to a certain line. That becomes the de facto offer to the other side. Your opponent can take all of the land up to that line. But as soon as they step over it, there is a tripwire force right there to initiate a conflict. So it is either the line drawn, or it is war. It is the same basic idea as a tripwire force more broadly. You do not want to be in a position where the other side can just walk into a disputed territory and take de facto control over it without triggering a costly war. Put differently, tripwires protect a state's proposal power. This, incidentally, is why Ukraine should be rather optimistic about what a final settlement with Russia will look like. Ukraine has control over the object that Russia covets, and despite the media circus surrounding who controls the offers circulating in Moscow, ultimately Ukraine can dictate for itself the proposed division by simply placing soldiers along the corresponding line. The final deal might not be great compared to what things looked like in January of 2022. But it will be among the best of Ukraine's alternatives that are still sufficient to convince Russia to stop. Friendly reminder that I have a video on the secondary channel that introduces crisis bargaining theory, if all of these lines seem foreign to you. It comes from my IRL Introduction to International Relations course, and actually, that created a big problem for me, which the sponsor of today's video, Chat LLM by Abacus AI, helped me solve. See, those videos were unscripted. I could use audio processing tools to have a written transcript formed, but that still left me with a block of unorganized text. Not exactly what I wanted to give students for their written study materials. So just feed it through an LLM and have it cut the sentences into proper paragraphs, right? Not so fast. Some models decided to completely rewrite the text as though it was an entirely different lecture. That is what is great about Chat LLM. One subscription gives you access to all of the top individual services: Claude Opus, Grok, Gemini Pro, ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and a ton more. So if I did not like the response from one model, I could simply click over to the next. Chat LLM also includes image generation from Flux and Nano Banana, and video generation from Sora and Kling. And by going to chatllm.abacus.ai/linesonmaps, you can get your first month for only $7, and then $10 per month thereafter. So thanks again to ChatLLM by Abacus AI for sponsoring today's video. Circling back to Iran, the thing about the Strait of Hormuz is that Iran has de facto proposal power over it. No one in Tehran has to ask for permission from Washington to begin charging a toll. They can simply announce that a toll system is now in effect, and everyone has to pay up or risk getting blown up. Obviously, that is an action that the United States would dispute. The US Navy loves nothing more than freedom of navigation for the world, and countries charging protection fees over natural waterways is a big no-no. Unnatural waterways? Sure, go crazy. But Hormuz is God-given, and any toll is effectively a tax on international commerce. That, in turn, breaks a fundamental pillar of the global order that the Allies had pledged to uphold even before World War II had ended. Now, Iran's ability to unilaterally attempt to impose a toll does not imply that Iran can succeed in its ploy to do so. The United States can always reject that proposal and start the bombing runs. Proposal power does not mean that you get to dictate the ultimate division between the parties. It just means that you can try to implement a system without having another party's direct cooperation. Nor does the Hormuz situation imply that Iran has total control over all proposal power. The United States, for example, controls the world's economic system, and thus Washington can dictate what portion of it Iran gets to participate in. But the portion of proposal power coming from Hormuz does mean that Iran has better control over where the settlement will fall within the bargaining range. Consequently, it means that Iran will receive a more attractive share of the bargaining good in any negotiated settlement. Zooming out, it seems so far that having proposal power is all upside. And indeed, among the infinities of possible ways to design negotiations, it has been mathematically proven that there is no better way for you to negotiate than by having you as the unilateral proposer. Alternatives can only cede bargaining power to your opponent at no real benefit to you. By the way, that paper was written while I was in grad school, with the first author being one of my dissertation advisors, and the second author being one of my Rochester contemporaries. Anyway, Fay and Kenkel's finding limits the scope of the question to a set of negotiations in a single time period, without any anticipated shifts in the balance of power over time. Unfortunately, something weird happens when power changes between now and the future, say because Iran might develop nuclear weapons. Let me illustrate the problem in the extreme case, where Iran has all of the proposal power. Then, in the future, when the balance of power looks like this, Iran will divide the bargaining good to ensure that the United States is just willing to accept. Rewinding to the present, the United States can secure up to here, minus its costs, by fighting to forestall the power shift. That is a much harder situation to secure peace as compared to when, say, the United States controls all of the proposal power in the future, and can therefore force the later settlement to here. Thus, even a generous concession from Iran in the present, well past what the United States could expect to receive if power were static, may still not be enough for the United States to endure the long-run consequences of the power shift. Once you sort through all of the complications, the lines-free logic is ultimately straightforward here. Hormuz granted proposal power means that Iran will inevitably extract a good deal for itself in the long run. But that implies that the United States will receive a comparatively less attractive deal in the long run, which discourages Washington from putting up with Iran's power shift. And that, in part, may be how we got into the current conflict in the first place. The Trump administration, with a generally itchy trigger finger, so long as it does not mean boots on the ground, prefer to fight rather than have the United States deal with the long-term consequences of a nuclear Iran. Now, we could stop here. We learned something neat about proposal power, and we saw a less straightforward second-order implication when there is shifting military power. But we still live in a world at war, and there are other coercive negotiations ongoing. So let's take this logic one step further, and go further east to discuss why this same principle appears to cause a significant problem with Taiwan, but that there may be a little more hope there. Cross-strait proposal power is more, well, straightforward here. Beijing cares about minimizing Taiwan's sovereignty, and, for the most part, Taiwan gets to dictate how that works short of a PLAN invasion. If Taipei wants to declare itself the capital of a fully independent, fully sovereign state, it can. If it wants to instead fall on a scale of the One China policy, it can do that as well. Meantime, Beijing's ability to dictate that choice short of war is minimal. Xi can use his influence to force Taiwan to don Chinese Taipei uniforms in international competition. Or he can dictate the exact Chinese word they use to translate Chinese in Chinese Taipei. And yes, that is something that has actually happened. Or he can prevent Taiwan's president from flying over third-party/second-party countries. Heck, whether we should describe them as second- or third-party countries itself belongs in this category. At the end of the day, though, this is political theater. Taipei gets to propose the thing that ultimately matters. Well, the central problem with cross-strait relations right now is an anticipated shift in the balance of power. The mainland is having a demographics crisis. You need a ton of manpower to invade the island, and, well, you know the rest. And that immediately takes us to the same problem as before, and perhaps worse because the bargaining power is so distorted in favor of Taiwan. Cue the fears of World War III becoming a reality. However, there is a significant difference between the government structures in Iran versus Taiwan. Democratic systems tend to be better at preserving the status quo, especially presidential systems that require laws to pass through multiple veto points. Just think about how so many people in the United States get frustrated with how difficult it is to pass votes through the House and the Senate, plus get a president's signature. Taiwan is a bit different because it only has a unicameral legislature. Oh, that is a fancy political science way to say that it has a House but not a Senate. Or maybe it is a Senate but not a House. Either way, Taiwan still has two stumbling blocks once you reintroduce the president. Plus, there is the ability to pass constitutional amendments, which require further hoops to jump through to overturn. Thus, if Taiwan is worried that the mainland might invade because of what the island is planning to do in the future, then the government could start passing laws to self-constrain its ability to change the status quo in the future. Of course, Taiwan's credible commitments have limits. If 10 years from now, the legislature and the executive branch agree that it is time for an independent Taiwan, there is not much that the government can do today to limit that. Outside the legal framework, a maverick president could also start acting more like a sovereign president, describing Taiwan as an independent state in public speeches. This may differ from the law of the land, but Beijing cares about the optics just as much as it cares about the legal situation. Now, will that forestall a mainland invasion? Unclear. Even if Beijing had all of the proposal power, shifting military capacity can still cause war. Consequently, democratic institutions are not some sort of magical solution to all of our preventive war woes. But they are better than an autocratic institutional system, where a single person can change his mind and suddenly upend all existing policy. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? The costs of war mean that a range of settlements are preferable to fighting, with critical distributional consequences for the parties. Proposal power determines who can exploit those differences. Iran controlling proposals about Strait of Hormuz policy creates complications for dealing with shifting power over time. And Taiwan's democratic institutions may mitigate a similar problem along the Taiwan Strait. As I said at the top, today's topic originally came from a question intended for my new series over on Lines on Maps Extra, where I try to answer viewers' key concerns about the world in 8 minutes or less. Check out that entire playlist here. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.